In every NBA offseason, you're bound to see a lot of player movement, transactions, contract extensions, trades, but every year there are also those contract signings that make you scratch your head a little, and sometimes they're almost so bad that it makes you wonder how the GM that agreed to said deal was able to obtain their job as an executive in the NBA in the first place. And so in today's video, we're going to be discussing the worst contract signings of this offseason, and you let me know if you agree or disagree with these in the comments. As always, if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, then be sure to subscribe, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, technically free agency is not quite ended yet. As of right now, there are still a handful of players who have remained unsigned, but the biggest contracts and the biggest names have all been accounted for, whether re-signing with their current teams or signing deals to join new teams. Also, I do want to be clear that I will not be covering trades that have happened so far this offseason. This is strictly free agency signings or contract extensions. A sign and trade can be included, but more focusing on the player being signed rather than the overall trade package. And to start off the list in no particular order or ranking of any kind, we've got to talk about Fred VanFleet, just because I think the figure for which he signed for the caliber of player that he is was just shocking. Don't get me wrong, Fred VanFleet is a hell of a player. Such a great undrafted success story, wasn't well known coming out of high school and college, had to work his way up into the league on some G League assignments, made a name for himself, made an all-star team, although I believe it was an injury reserve all-star selection, but he's proven to be a reliable starter in the league and a solid scorer and playmaker. But 3 years, $130 million, a max contract for Fred VanFleet, a player that is going to be 30 next season, and for a team like the Rockets who is rebuilding, to sign a max contract player going into their 30s doesn't really fit their timeline, and it's just absolutely baffling to me. Now granted, given the new CBA rules, teams are required to spend at least 90% of their salary cap, which for the record, I really don't like, by the way, because then you have teams like the Rockets handing out these big contracts because they have so much cap space going into the offseason, and thus players are getting handed out contracts that quite frankly aren't deserved and well over their market value because teams are being forced to spend money. So I say this because while as bad of a contract signing as this one was, I also get that the Rockets had to throw out big money to players, a max contract at that, to fulfill their 90% cap spend requirement. And Fred VanFleet was one of the few players who was looking for a big deal. Most knew that he wasn't going to be re-signing with the Raptors, and that was an opportunity for them to fill up some cap space. But regardless, signing Fred VanFleet, a fringe all-star, and to be honest, I don't even know if we can really call him a fringe all-star at this point, especially after the somewhat down season he had with the Raptors, and also the fact that he's about to be 30, and there is a world where he can actually start declining further. But paying Fred VanFleet over $42 million per year, even in this inflationary environment, with the salary cap increasing, is just bad. Now, I will concede that at least it is just 3 years. If this was a 5-year max deal, that would have been front office malpractice to guarantee VanFleet that kind of money long term. But even at 3 years, $130 million is still very, very questionable, especially for a team that is trying to build for the future. Sticking with the Rockets though, since we know that they had to fill up their cap sheet, and I would argue this was an even worse signing than Fred VanFleet. Yeah, we got to talk about Dillon Brooks. 4 years, $80 million is just insane to me that a player like Brooks, who shit-talked his way to relevancy in the NBA, made a name for himself by just being annoying and giving outlandish sound bites to the media and being overly cocky. And even after his current team said that under no circumstances would they be bringing him back, that should be a red flag right there. Yet despite all that, the Houston Rockets gave him a 4-year guaranteed contract that is going to pay him $20 million per year. Yes, there are aspects of Dillon Brooks' game that are nice. He's a hustle defender. He will always give you 100% effort when he's on the floor. He will get in your face if you're not meeting his level of energy, which is good for a team that is trying to establish an identity. But come on now, $80 million to one player who has one of the worst seasons by efficiency last year, shooting below 40% from the field, 32% from 3 on 6 attempts per game, a true shooting percentage below 50, and a sub-10 player efficiency rating. Now, I don't see how you can justify giving Brooks $20 million a year. I mean, most analysts peg Brooks would maybe be getting the mid-level exception at around $12 million at best, if not lower than that, but somehow the Rockets, who no one can quite figure out what they're doing, gave Brooks an $80 million contract. The next player we've got on the list, and honestly, this was probably the worst signing of the offseason thus far, even more so than Dillon Brooks, and it's the worst especially given the circumstances of what happened right after the signing, and that's the Blazers signing Jerami Grant to a 5-year, $160 million contract extension. 5 years fully guaranteed for Jerami Grant. Jerami Grant is 29. He's going to be turning 30 this season. A solid player, don't get me wrong. He had a great season. He had one of his best seasons shooting the ball from 3 at over 40%, but a 5-year guaranteed deal for a player at his level, that is front office malpractice. You're going to be paying Jerami Grant over $30 million a year until he's 35, paying him like you would a franchise cornerstone and one of your best players. And to make this signing especially bad, which to be fair wasn't really on the front office or their fault because they didn't know that this would happen at the time, but the day after the signing of Jerami Grant to this big extension, Damian Lillard requests out of Portland. He asks to be traded. Now, there was speculation on whether Dame would finally request to be traded after all these years of the Blazers not putting a competitive enough team around him, but for the Blazers, they were pretty clear that they were going to commit to Dame to build a winning team around him. And it was reported that Dame actually wanted the Blazers to keep Grant on the team. He wanted Grant to be a part of that core. And so the front office said, okay, well, first things first, we got to keep Jerami Grant. We have to make him an offer that he can't refuse. And they did that. And then Dame asks out, which is just horrible timing because now the Blazers are likely going to be going on a rebuild, which they have a bright future, by the way, with the young players they have and also adding in a potential generational talent in Scoot Henderson. But now you've got Grant committed for the next 5 years until he's 35, eating up a good chunk of your salary cap. And at that rate, you're now put in a position where that contract is going to be very hard to trade. Teams aren't going to be willing to take on a long-term deal, high-value contract, especially with the new rules around the CBA as it relates to the new two-tier tax system that penalizes high-spending teams from having the rights to use their full mid-level exception. So yes, Grant, a good player, had a great season last year, one of his best, but also put up these great numbers on one of the worst teams in the league. Good player, but a horrible contract. Next on this list, and I've said it before, I know I'm in the minority on this one and thinking it was a horrible contract signing, but the Warriors extending Draymond Green 4 years, $100 million. In my view, what makes this contract especially bad is the player option they gave him on the final year of his deal when he turns 37 years old. As I've said before, I get it. This is one of those loyalty contracts, taking care of your players who help bring 4 titles to the franchise. He's the heart and soul of this team. You need a defensive-minded player in that system, but at the same time, there are also downsides to Draymond Green. One, he is declining to an extent. He's not the same level of player he once was on defense, not as quick with his lateral footwork as he once was. He's also always been limited offensively, but that's especially been the case in recent years. And Draymond Green, I mean, I love his work ethic, his heart, the tenacity he brings on the court, but sometimes that can get him in trouble. Technical fouls, suspensions, punching his teammates in practice. Like, Draymond comes with some baggage, we all know that. And it would be one thing to pay Draymond a $100 million contract if he was, say, 28, 29, even 30, but at 33, he'll be turning 34 this season. Giving him a 4-year deal, fully guaranteed, even a player option when he's 37, is baffling to me. Yes, you have to keep maximizing Steph's prime. Yes, you have to keep pushing to win titles. But even Steph is 35. Klay Thompson isn't the same player he used to be either. He's also 33. At some point, you have to start thinking about your future if you're the Warriors, and giving Draymond this long-term of a deal, paying him $25 million, isn't it. And I think they will very much regret this contract down the line as Draymond declines further and further with age. Another contract signing that I don't think will age well was Kyrie Irving agreeing to a 3-year, $126 million deal with the Mavericks. Yeah, the Mavs had to extend Kyrie, especially when they traded all those assets to get him, but we all know Kyrie comes with his own fair share of headaches, lack of motivation. Is he committed to the team? Is he not committed to the team? Yeah, Kyrie is a great player, one of the more skilled players in the NBA, but does he fit well with a superstar in Luka Doncic? And are the Mavs constructing the best roster around these guys to maximize their potential? And yeah, Kyrie isn't young anymore, he's 31. Now granted, it's only a 3-year deal. I think anything longer than that would have been a huge mistake by the Mavs, but at 3 years, borderline a max level contract is still questionable to say the least. Another one, and this wasn't a free agency signing, but rather a rookie contract extension, and that's Desmond Bane. Look, I actually love Desmond Bane. I love this guy's game, and up until his contract extension, I thought he was one of the more underrated players in the NBA. High energy player, plays hard on both ends of the floor, great outside shooter, but can also finish at the rim. It's gotten better every year since being drafted, arguably one of the biggest draft steals when you consider he was taken 30th overall. And Bane most certainly deserved a big contract extension and an early extension to his rookie scale deal, but at a 5-year max contract extension worth over $200 million for Desmond Bane. You're going to be paying Desmond Bane over $40 million a year at that rate that superstars in the league are making is a stretch. Now, he's younger. He could play his way into being worth that contract. He did just turn 25. You're going to be paying him this deal through his prime. And yeah, maybe he gets to that star level. But this also isn't a rookie max extension for a player who is 21 or 22 that has loads of potential like we saw in the max extension deals for guys like Anthony Edwards and Tyrese Halliburton. I don't really like the LaMelo Ball max contract, but I can live with it given the fact that he's young, an exciting player, and the Hornets, I mean, they need big names, so locking him up long term, you kind of had to do it. And for players like that, the hope is that they keep rising and play into that contract with the salary cap increasing over time. It eventually becomes a value deal. But for a player like Desmond Bane, I just don't see the star potential there that would warrant a max contract extension of 5 years, $207 million. Now, there were also some other questionable signings, but I don't think these were as egregious as the ones that I just mentioned. But, the contracts that I could see coming back and hurting a team, Cam Johnson, 4 years, $108 million. I thought this was a bit of a stretch. Great player, still has upside potential, but that was an overpay when you're giving him over $25 million a year. Rui Hachimura, 3 years, $51 million. Over $17 million a year for Hachimura. Yeah, that's an overpay, especially when you compare it to some of his draft class counterparts. Bruce Brown, 2 years, $45 million. Yeah, I get it. Brown had a great run with the Nuggets, was huge for them in that title run, and yeah, you knew he was going to be getting paid for having that kind of exposure on a big stage, but paying Brown over $22 million a year, yikes. I can live with it though because it's only 2 years. Anything more than that, he would have been at the top of this list for that annual rate. Joe Ingles, the Magic signing him for 2 years, $22 million. That was a head scratcher. His age, injury history, and overall production, and the fact that he doesn't fit the timeline of the Magic didn't really make sense to me. Also, probably Dante DiVincenzo. I actually liked DiVincenzo and thought he would be getting a nice payday, but 4 years, $50 million is committing a lot from the Knicks when his market value is probably somewhere in the $10 million range, maybe even less. That would make more sense also on a shorter term deal. But anyway, those are some of the worst contract signings of this offseason, in my opinion anyway. I'll have a video out on some of the biggest bargain deals or best signings of the offseason, so be on the lookout for that. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.